Hey everyone, I'm William. I'm the puppet master or GM or whatever you want to call it for Jay Doesn't Belong Here. I'm not 100% sure when I'm going to release this. It might be right after Season 1 has ended or after the entire thing is wrapped up. Now, obviously you guys know, so if this is after everything is wrapped up, then I'm going to talk about everything. How I made this, why I made this, what I'm planning on doing for the next couple of seasons, which obviously is going to be a bit different from what you guys have experienced. Everything. Now, if this has come out after Season 1 is wrapped up, then I'm going to talk about everything that I can, because I don't want to spoil you guys. So, without further ado, welcome to this docu-series or documentary on the behind-the-scenes of JDVH. Apologies if I look over there, but that's where the script is, and I'm not going to try and memorize the script for the documentary. So, I've decided to release this immediately after Season 1, so I'll save the Season 2 spoilers for the Season 2 behind the scenes. So, I guess the best place to start would be with where I came up with the idea for the ARG. It was actually exactly 1 week before the first episode was released, which I acknowledge is sort of insane. I came up with the idea, then I realized that I had to do it now because it would not work, and it would not work if I was in college, and I was going to college real soon. So I wrote all the scripts for Jay's channel in a week. 15 scripts. And that's all I had. That is all I had when I started this. I just had those scripts and what I was planning on doing stuck in my head. And yeah, because of how I did that, I sort of ended up flying by the seat of my pants for the rest of the season because I didn't have time. I just kept on going or had my appendix explode. So I didn't have time to stop and plot out everything else. I just had it plotted out in my head, and I sort of wrote down a rough timeline, but I didn't have any of the scripts for Steven or John. I didn't even plan on getting Blaze into this season. I planned on him coming up in next season, but then I realized that because of things that I can't talk about, it's probably narratively better for him to be introduced here, and because of the NBC shutdown that happened, it actually made some narrative sense. Kinda. I'll explain that later. Okay, so quick sidebar for those of you who want to know what equipment I'm using. For my camera, I'm using a Samsung HMX F90 camera, a small GorillaPod, my phone, and for editing I use Audacity, Photoshop, and Premiere, both of which I got for free along with After Effects, which I'm hoping to make use of in Season 2. Along with those three systems, I also use a multitude of online code and cipher makers. There are also free alternatives for Photoshop and Premiere that you could use, like GIMP and HitFilm. So assuming you have a phone, you could make this ARG, or an ARG of equivalent quality, for about $250. Cheaper if you use a different camera, and only $13 if you use your phone as a camera. But I suppose at that point you wouldn't really need a GorillaPod. So if you just use your phone and use your camera, you could in fact make this ARG for about $0, assuming you don't have any of the equipment already. I did have the equipment already picked out, so I have spent a total of $0 on this project. Depending on actors and location, you might have to pay more, but in my case, I only use volunteers and no location charged me for using it. So, as of now, I haven't spent any money on this ARG. I'm going to guess that that's going to change, but it's still incredibly cheap to make these. Alright, from here on out I'm going to be a disembodied voice. I'm sorry if you hear any lip smacking or anything like that. I'm not going to edit the audio for this that heavily. So let's cover the main channel videos. The first video was on April 15th, and yeah, that was one of the more difficult ones from an acting perspective. Everything else, it was the easiest one to write, to edit, and to plan. But acting, monologues are some of the hardest things for me to do, and the second, first, and last videos are all monologue. When you're talking with another person, you don't have to hold the whole thing in its entirety in your head. You just need to have the next couple of lines, and then you play off the other person. It's a back and forth. But when you're all alone and have nothing to play off of, you've got to deliver those lines, and you've got to do it well. And to be honest, I don't think I did a great job on those 3 videos, especially the first 2, partially because I hadn't internalized Jay's character yet, but mostly because it had to be done in one take.
No hidden cuts, no cheats, just the camera and me, from the moment I turned it on to the moment I turned it off. The only editing I could do on those videos was the turn area at the end. Speaking of, the 4 codes were the only bit of editing I didn't do. I got a friend of mine to make them, and I just added the sound and stuck them to the end of the video. Another thing I don't like about this first video in particular is the yellow tint. You see, all the lights I used were warm, so they produce a yellow light, and I didn't take account of that in the first video, so my white balance was off. When I put that into Premiere and saw what happened, I had to kick myself for forgetting something so simple like that. Thankfully, I remembered it for the rest of the videos, though. Now, let's talk about the alternate websites for a bit. Most of them are actually based on actual websites. For instance, Zwant is based on a website called Quant, and 30 Frames is based on Dailymotion. I feel like a lot of alternate world stories focus a bit too much on large-scale change, which can be effective, but I think that large-scale changes are a bit overdone and can lead to the world feeling a bit gimmicky. I feel like small-scale changes that lead to larger-scale changes can be more effective, especially in this case, because, it's a mystery story and hard. So yeah, Jay's world is a bit more technologically advanced and has a bit more red tape, but in my opinion at least, it doesn't really fall into any alternate universe tropes, and it's close enough to our world that you could be forgiven for thinking that they're the same. Speaking of little changes, the 416 error. Now, in the real world, this is supposed to be a 404 error. So I took a look at all the error messages, and I mixed around their classifications. So our 416 error is a 408 error in their world, and our 404 error is a 416, and so on and so forth. The reason I chose 416 was because the blurb I saw about it said that a 416 error meant insufficient range, which I thought was a neat little Easter egg alluding to the different worlds thing. Let's move on to the second video. Again, difficult to act, but it was fun to write, partially because Jay's getting really excited and dropping the professionalism a little bit, but also because it let me do some world building and show Jay's thought process a bit. So something you may notice is that the number 2 and 3 keep popping up. I consider it to be a bit of a leitmotif for the sci-fi elements of the piece. They're the 2 and we're the 3. They're a bit ahead of us, but not by much, and they still do have their own problems, some of them being quite severe, as you guys might find out in Season 2. Okay. So, on to Episode 3. Asher. Okay. The thing I want to talk about first is how fucking difficult it was to find an actress. My requirements weren't strict. They were as follows. Girl that's around my age who can act. But even with those requirements, that still limited me to about an eighth of the people in my high school. That's still around 100 people, and I wasn't exactly picky, but a lot of those 100 people just weren't interested, and to be fair, I didn't really have a lot of time to get them hooked. I was on a bit of a tight schedule. I did, after some searching, find someone who was interested, so I gave them the script and told me to give me a list of times when they'd be available. They said they would, walked off, and I never saw them again. After I sent some emails that they never responded to, I tried to look for someone else, and I got someone who was interested again. I gave them the script, asked them to give me times when they were available. They said they would, and the same fucking thing happened. I never heard from them again. I don't know why these two never got back to me. Maybe they lost interest, maybe they forgot, maybe they got teleported into, I don't know, fucking Mars. But I became real fucking desperate real quick after that. I started asking people with absolutely no acting experience, but, we're still creative types. And only then did I meet Ellen, the actress who plays Asher. So, one thing that you guys seem to think about Asher is that she's some great computer programming genius. This isn't really the case, actually. She knows a respectable amount about computers, but her focus is actually on video game development. Web design and programming is just something she dabbles in, although she does use it to get a bit of money in her pocket since she doesn't like accepting money from her parents. Let's move on to Episode 4. One thing that I like about this video is that it shows a side of both Jay and Asher that I think has been neglected a bit in this season. Most of the season, Asher's in full empath mode, but here her competitive streak is shining through a bit, along with her playful side. Jay also lets himself go along with the game a bit. This video pretty much shows how these two normally act before there's all these mitigating circumstances. One thing you also might notice is that Jay brings up geology seemingly out of nowhere. All the other questions they ask are either driven by personality, like Asher asking about Star Wars, or taken from the Twitter. Actually, the geology question does fit into one of these categories, because in addition to being a part of the school paper, Jay is also a member of the school's geology club. Let's see, other things about this video. Okay, so the one country that doesn't exist in Jay's world is the Holy See. The Pope condemned Mussolini's actions during World War II, which meant that the agreement which gave the Pope his own country never happened. Oh, one little mistake I've made during this video is I forgot to take off my necklace. If you look closely, I think you can see it. I'll try circling it in post if I can. Okay, so, episode 5. The one where I accidentally say iOS instead of just OS. I wanted to leave that part of the phone ambiguous for now, along with, some other things, but you gotta play into your mistakes. So, looks like the phone uses Apple's operating system. One thing that I think might have gone overlooked in this episode is the comment that Jay made about the phone's battery life. It is amazing, as in you could leave it on for about 3 months before it would hit 50%. Half a year battery life. So, this video is also the first quote-unquote appearance of Gerald Brody, who is played by my actual real-life father. Part of this is because I wasn't expecting you guys to take such an interest in Gerald, which is mostly my fault, considering how I set him up and the Twitter poll I ran. But so, yeah, I was expecting him to only be in a few episodes as a side character, not one of the main agents, and the only agent who's gotten any screen time so far. So, before this I thought that if my dad recorded the voicemail, he'd only have to do 1 or 2 lines apart from that. So, yeah, sorry Dad, you sort of became one of the main antagonists. Alright, on to episode 6, which I think has some of the best acting in the season. I was emotionally wrecked by proxy after we finished the take I went with, and I had to sit down for a few minutes before we shot another one. This was actually the first episode I thought of making when I first came up for the concept of the ARG, the main character meeting his father from a world where he wasn't the one in an accident. One more thing, this is the first video uploaded by Asher, and you might notice that Jay and Asher have very different ways of naming their videos. Jay's very to the point, and what I was going with for Asher was sort of a high fantasy, fancy titling thing, although after I saw Christopher Robin, I realized that Asher has almost the exact same naming process as a Winnie the Pooh book. Okay, now for the first video after my appendix blew up, which, yeah, was a real thing that happened, so it had to happen to Jay too, since it's a built-in excuse for why I don't have a video this week, and it's one that you can prove is happening since, you can take pictures of the hospital. So in the video, Jay really hasn't been able to deal with what he thinks happened to his father. In the original concept for the video, it's because that it was supposed to come out around 5 days after the last one. But I think him having to deal with his surgery and the aftermath actually is a good substitute for that reason, since he's been too busy trying to recover to give that emotional atom bomb any of his consideration. Another small thing about this video is that Asher is actually giving a bit of a hint for a certain code without realizing it. You can make those kinds of coincidences happen in a narrative medium. Let's move on to the next video. Now, at this point, I was expecting people to have sent me in their translations of the ternary, so I was going to have Jay searching through tweets and comments and have the translations that he found in the video's description. But, at this point, nobody had done any real interaction with the characters apart from giving them questions to ask Google and a little bit of Twitter polling. So I had to change the script a bit and then give out the translations on Twitter a while later. Okay, so on to the last video of the onslaught. This one takes place about an hour after the previous two. Asher headed out to check out some books on coding and to recharge the camera and turned it on when she saw that Jay was doing something and thought it might be important. This was also a pretty difficult one acting-wise because there's another giant monologue I had to get through. After a few takes, I decided to try something different. I turned the monologue into some bullet points, a list of things that I wanted Jay to talk about, and then I just ad-libbed the actual lines. I think it turned out pretty good and really realistic, which is probably better than if I memorized the original monologue and just spouted it off like all of that was on the top of his head and able to just come out perfectly. FYI, at the start of Season 2, Jay will still be keeping all this from his mother, since he does trust Asher's judgment, especially when he knows that his is impaired. Now, this script is getting fairly long. I think it's at about 3,000 words so far, and I don't want to edit a video that long. So I'm going to end this video here and pick up with the 10th episode in the next part of the season retrospective. I'll see y'all then.